Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Which Way Podcast, True Crime Tuesday. I'm your host, Misty G, and today we're going to dive into the Broken Arrow murders. Now, here's your trigger warning. This will include some graphic details surrounding murder, including children, mass shootings, and weapons. So if you are not stoked to hear about any of that, you might want to change now. I hope you don't, but that's your warning if you need to. So this takes place in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. The Bever family lived there, and it consisted of the parents David and April Bever, as well as their 7 children. Robert was age 18, Michael age 16, Crystal age 13, Daniel age 12, Christopher age 7, Victoria age 5, and the youngest was baby Autumn, just under the age of 2. The Bever family was considered a very religious family, and this was not uncommon in Broken Arrow, as that is a very small religious town. It's an area that's kind of known for the number of churches that are around town. There's really no shortage at all, and so most of the town is pretty religious. There seems to be literally a church on every corner. The town is very quiet. It rarely sees any type of crime, let alone murder. David was a very successful man working in IT for a local company. He also had an office at home, so he would sometimes telecommute. April also did some odds and end work having to do with computers from her home. Now, in conjunction with this, she did homeschool all of their children. Both David and April felt it best to homeschool their children to shelter them from the outside dangers of the world, and unfortunately, this would turn around and bite them in the ass later. Robert Bever was also employed. At the age of 18, he's the oldest of the 7 children, and he had a job at a call center that was religious in nature, and he would actually pray with callers that would call in. He was also known for working as an investigative producer at KJRH, and he had freelance work that was featured in the Los Angeles Times, MSNBC, and CNN. However, if you Google his name, none of that is what comes up. That is not what he is known for. Now, with being homeschooled, none of the children made or had any friends, and their only link to the outside world was really what they found on their phones, tablets, and TV, which allegedly they had free reign to search on. So, what they watched, what they searched, what they looked up, anything that they got into and was interested in, none of that was really monitored by anybody. So, they could kind of do whatever they wanted. The oldest of the children, Robert, developed an obsession over mass school shootings, and he felt that killing more than one person would make him godlike. And as he began to share some of his interests with his younger brother, Michael, he saw the interest and excitement that Michael shared over those topics of mass killings, and the boys began to feed off of each other. So, what was something that they had just, I guess, thought about and only dreamt of at a period of time was quickly becoming a plan for the future. It was actively being put into motion. Robert's job is what began funding their obsession. For months, the boys began ordering and collecting knives, body armor. They got helmets. They also found that they could order firearms and have them delivered to their local, firearms store, and also ammunition. Now, because of the lack of friends and the lack of being in the public eye, there wasn't really any warning signs except for their sister Crystal. Crystal was the 13-year-old at the time, and she became afraid of her brothers, and she was concerned about their collection of knives, and they had books and diaries where they wrote pretty graphic wishes, wants, and details in their plans to wanting to do mass murders. She brought this up to her mother, but she was met with sort of a boys will be boys kind of attitude, and it was really blown off. It wasn't really something that they took very seriously, even though Crystal had allegedly complained about it several times. And reportedly, the father, David, was only angry about the way they were wasting their money, not really about anything else, but that they were just, working hard and then putting that money to waste on things that they didn't need. Now, in July of 2015, Robert Bever had ordered some guns to be delivered to their local gun store. In addition, he ordered ammunition. And from what I can find out, it was approximately about 3,000 rounds of ammunition. And he had, so you can imagine this, the size of this delivery. And he ordered that, and it was scheduled to be delivered on July 23rd of 2015. Now, at this point, the brothers realized that when the ammunition arrives at the house, the father was going to see it. They were going to see what was being delivered, and they were going to realize that what had been told to them before was not just talk, and it wasn't just boys will be boys. So that evening, the boys decided that they were going to have to go ahead and take care of their family. So on the evening of July 22nd, 2015, they put their plan into motion. The evening started with Robert and Michael in their room. They knew that April, the mother, and their sister Crystal would be watching TV in the living room as they usually did. Their father would be asleep, as well as the younger children. And so Michael went into the living room, approaching his sister, and asked for her to come into his room so that she could look at something on the computer that he wanted to show her. She complied with this, and she went into his room. Michael sits down at his desk in front of his computer, and April stands next to him. And as she's staring at the computer screen, Robert approached her from behind and slit her throat. Now, Robert, because of what he had seen on television before, he thought this was going to be really easy. All I have to do is slit the throat. She's going to drop and it'll be done. It's not like it is on TV. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he actually made that statement that it's not like it is on TV. And so he slit her throat, but it was not as easy as he thought it was going to be. And she began to fight back. She was yelling, kicking, hitting, screaming as much as she could, flailing around, just fighting back in every way that she could. And he continued stabbing her several times in the stomach and in her arms from fighting back. Now, as this commotion is happening, April, the mother, hears this in the living room, and she comes running towards the room that the children are in. As she approached, Robert lunged at her, and April was killed by blunt force trauma in more than 48 wounds to her head, neck, torso, as well as her arms and hands from trying to fight back. This was all taking place in the hallway. And at this point, brother Daniel was awoken, this is the 12-year-old, and witnessed his brother Robert attacking his family. He ran and he hid in another room, which I believe was his dad's office, and he made a phone call to 911. I'm going to play that clip for you right now.
11 hours, 32 minutes, and 25 seconds p.m. 911. 911. Hello? Hello? Hi, where are you at? You're out recording 7411. What address? Okay. Are you the only one there? No. My dad is attacking my family. Your dad is attacking your family? No, my brother. Hold on. Okay, who's attacking your family? What? Who's attacking your family? Yes. Who is it? Did I say no? Are you there? Hello? What's going on there? What's going on there? Hello? Hello?
I swear I've listened to that call several times, and every time I hear it, I swear I hear something different. It is just so heartbreaking to listen to this boy. And one of the things that makes it even more heartbreaking, aside from the fact that you can hear him in the towards the end of the call saying, "No, Michael, don't." So he's talking to his brother, but one of the even more heartbreaking things, if it could even possibly get any worse, is that Daniel is trying to tell the operator that his brother's killing his family because he only knows of Robert trying to do this. And as he's on the call with the operator, Michael begins banging on the door to get Daniel to let him in so that he can hide too. So Daniel does open the door to try to help save his brother, but once the door's open, Robert looks at Michael and says, "He's all yours." And Daniel, at the age of 12 years old, while he's on the call with the operator, is then stabbed over 21 times in the back, shoulder, and chest because he wanted to help protect his brother and open the door to them both trying to attack. It's just heartbreaking to hear. But at this point, the police have been alerted, and I don't know that Michael and Robert really considered that or thought about that. That was one of the boys at the end of the call that picked up the phone and said hello and then hung it up. So at this point, they're just trying to finish taking care of their family. And Robert sees Crystal, who has managed to crawl outside of the house. So he goes out there, he covers her mouth and grabs her and drags her back inside of the house and locks the door, and then additionally stabs her more times in the stomach. Christopher, age 10, was also killed with 21 stab wounds to his back, his chest, shoulder, as well as his lower legs. And Victoria, age 5, was killed with 23 stab wounds to both sides of her neck, her chest, her back, and her upper arms. Now you can imagine the amount of blood that is covering this entire house. And the house is huge. The dad has been asleep this entire time. The house is huge. It's not like you'll just hear the commotion and come out of your room. The house is huge. But David is finally awoken by all of the commotion. And as he runs to approach the boys, Robert had to have just gotten really lucky with his first swing because it took David down immediately. And then they began to stab him 27 more times to the torso, face, neck, and left arm and hand. Now, at this point, there was a bang on the front door from the police that were dispatched during that 911 call. One police officer that arrived first had experience previously with high risk entries and asked for volunteers from the other officers that were there if they'd be willing to enter the home with him instead of waiting for backup because they could hear somebody right inside crying for help, and they didn't have time to wait for backup to arrive. So the officers entered the home and were met with, as you can imagine, just a horrific scene of blood everywhere. Right inside the door was Crystal, who was miraculously still alive at this point and managed to sputter out that her brothers, Robert and David, were responsible for these killings. The officers described hearing Crystal as trying to talk, but as she was speaking, you could hear the blood in her mouth. You could hear it in her throat. She was really struggling to stay alive, and she was struggling to communicate with the officers. At 13 years old, the first words she's trying to sputter out is, "Who's doing this to her family?" Each room that these officers walk into is just completely covered in blood spatter, and each room pretty much has a body in it. Now, these officers, if you are able to find any of the interviews for them or any documentaries for them, this is a scene that still haunts them. Again, Broken Arrow is just a really small town. They don't see things like this. The officers can pretty much go their entire career without seeing anything like this. That goes to be said almost anywhere, but in this really small town, this is just not something that's normal. And so this is something that's really stuck with these officers, as you can imagine, having to go to sleep at night and seeing these children that they weren't able to do anything for. Excuse me. Now, one of the last rooms that they approached is where they walk in and they see a crib, and already they're feeling, really nauseous with everything that they've already seen. But they find baby Autumn, who did not have a scratch on her. Um, what we find out later is that the police banging on the front door is what saved her life. It's not like the brothers had just spared her because she was a baby. Now, as the police banged on the door originally, the brothers ran out the back door when they were on their way to kill Autumn. They ran out the back door to a field behind their house. It was very muddy, overgrown. There was a lot of grass everywhere. And they were found very quickly with the use of a canine. And as they were approached, Robert seemed to kind of cooperate and give up almost immediately, putting his hands in the air. But Michael was still kind of squatting behind the bushes and was very fidgety with his hands and with his arms, and he wasn't really complying to orders. And so they did release the canine on him. And once the canine grabbed a hold of his shoulder and pulled him out, he began to comply. He did not want to be attacked by the dog. So they both began to comply, and they were apprehended without further incident, and they were taken to the car. And as they were walking to their cars, they were boasting about how proud they were of themselves for what they had done. There was sort of like a cocky smile on their face. Especially Robert was really, really proud of himself, and it began to relay to officers where they could find information on all the plans for the killings. Like this was obviously premeditated. So the the gruesome details of what the police officers had already seen by walking into this house, they didn't stop there. So the officers are then apprehending Michael and Robert, and now they're having to be interviewed. Michael was interviewed first, and while he was forthcoming with the details, he said that his brother, Robert, was responsible for all of the killings and that it was just his responsibility to lure the family members to Robert. He didn't want to admit to any of the killings himself. He was reluctant to discuss it. And police actually, one of the tactics that they had used with him was, how are you going to, you're going to, if you don't tell us, then you're going to let your brother, he's going to get all the credit. That sounds horrible, but you have to remember that these boys, this is what they wanted. This was something they wanted to be famous for. And so they're trying to get him to admit to his portion or further details by telling him that he can get credit for it. And he all of a sudden seems really reluctant to do so, saying that he doesn't want credit for that and that he doesn't want to talk about it. So the police then have to go and interview Robert. So Robert's interviews were sealed by a judge due to the graphic nature of his answers. So, from what I understand, you cannot find his interviews anywhere. If anybody knows where you can find them, if you can, please let me know. But I'm not able to find any information other than what they released verbally based on those interviews. Um, the police were able to determine that in addition to being homeschooled, it was discovered that after the tragedy had happened, Robert and Michael were basically, this is, I guess, their defense setting up their story. So they were basically saying that they were children that rarely ever left the house. Most of the time, they would be home for months at a time without going anywhere at all, keeping in mind they're homeschooled. So they don't ever have to leave the house. And the boys were allegedly told that as they were growing up, that the world was full of dangerous people that would hurt them, and that that's why their parents wanted them to stay at home and also be homeschooled. It was also reported by Robert that he was often abused at the hands of his father, David, and that he had wished since he was 13 years old that his parents were dead due to the abuse. They also reported to police again that there was a flash drive in the house that contained all of their plans for the murders. Now, this is all allegedly. There was no evidence or proof or anything of any abuse sustained to the children by David or anything that I could at least find. Robert also confessed that baby Autumn was the last to be murdered. She was not spared on purpose, but that they had to flee the house when the police knocked on the door. Their plan for her was to decapitate her with an axe. Robert then maintained that he was the only one that did the actual killings, even though he and Michael acted together as partners. However, Michael did later confess to stabbing one of his brothers and then confessed to stabbing his mother as well, while Robert did everything else. Keep in mind how many injuries each person had, and the mother had more than double of everybody else of their wounds. Their plan was to murder their family, cut them into pieces, store them in containers upstairs, and then clean up the house. The ammunition was then to arrive the next day, and they were going to pack up the car and head out to a highly populated area anywhere to commit mass killings. Robert confessed that he and Michael both planned to outdo the 1999 Columbine massacre and the 2012 Aurora, Colorado shooting. They both felt that it would make them more godlike to commit such a mass murder, and they wanted to be famous. And this is what they wanted to be famous for. They wanted a body count originally of at least 50 people when starting out, and hoped to reach outside of Oklahoma and achieving a body count of 500 or more. Achieving. Okay, keep that in mind. That's the word that he used, achieving. This was going to be a great success to him. And they both admired serial killers. Now, Robert and Michael both obviously are being sentenced. Robert pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. He was given multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Later that year, in 2016, it was reported that he attempted suicide, and detention officers had to cut him down. They had him checked out by medical and moved him to suicide watch. He later attempted to attack prison staff with a sharp object, and he received 3 additional life sentences for that. Robert is still incarcerated at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center in Lexington, Oklahoma. Michael Bever, on the other hand, was found guilty of 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to kill. He received 5 consecutive life sentences with the possibility of parole in addition to 28 years for the assault. Michael is still incarcerated at the Lexington Assessment and Reception Center in Cleveland County, Oklahoma, keeping in mind these boys cannot be housed together at the same facility. Now, I'm wanting to end this podcast on a more positive note. We'll remember the survivors and the victims of this tragedy. The Bever house stood abandoned and was a haunting reminder of the tragedy that occurred there, and neighbors wanted to buy the home from the lenders but struggled to raise the funds for it and only reached about half their goal. Then, mysteriously, one night it burned to the ground. Obviously, most people are suspecting arson, but the city of Broken Arrow then bought that land and built a beautiful park in its place. So now there's a little bit of positive light or a more positive memory that stands in place instead of the Bever home. There were survivors of those murders. Crystal is now aged approximately 22, and Autumn is now approximately 11. They're both living their lives privately elsewhere, obviously not wanting to remember or be attached to this horrific event. There is a documentary on Netflix or Hulu regarding the Bevers, siblings who kill or killer siblings. I'm not sure of it off the top of my head, but if you want more about the Bever story, check out season 1, I believe. There's the story about the Bevers in there. Additionally, there's more podcasts if you want further information, and you can also do a Google search to find more in-depth 30-minute to hour-long interviews with Michael Bever. As I stated before, Robert Bever's has been sealed. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you subscribe. Please join me every Tuesday back here for True Crime Tuesdays.